It is official. Brad Treliving is the new general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. So what next? We'll discuss all that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast. It is your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your daily fix for all things Leafs. I'm your host, David Morassutti from Sportsnet. Flying solo today. Mike Stefano just had to get ready for what should be a very, very busy day on Toronto Sports Radio, but he will be back for the next episode. Just a reminder that Locked On Leafs is a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, so be sure to subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts from. And you can now catch us up on YouTube. Locked On Leafs, it's your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And let's just say if you place the wager on Brad Treliving to be the next general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs, you got some money being deposited into your FanDuel account. So a little round of applause for anybody who did do that. And look, at this point, we should not be surprised. We should not have been surprised that it's Brad Treliving that got the job. We've been talking about it for almost a week. It just seemed like everything was being lined up for this to happen. And I know certain people are probably not happy to see that this is the course of action that the Leafs went to. You're very much entitled to that. I have no issue if you have a problem with this hire. But we gotta see what's gonna come next. Right? There's going to be some very, very big questions going to be asked, of Brad Treliving. And we're going to discuss some of those a little later in the show. But let's just talk about the immediate kind of reaction to all this. So Brad Treliving, he's here. We don't really have an idea of what the contract is or how long the commitment is. I didn't really see much in that regard. So all by accounts, the Leafs, I'm sure Brad Treliving did his best to make, ensure that if he knew that he was the Leafs guy, he was going to get compensated pretty heavily for it. Now, obviously, with the move being made, there's a lot of question marks about what comes next for this Leafs team, right? Where does Brad Treliving kind of focus his attention? And as Luke Fox actually wrote in his story for Sportsnet, if you haven't read it yet, it's why Brad Treliving and the Maple Leafs make the most sense. That's the headline there. He actually brings up the fact that, and I'll read it actually from Luke's words right now. We can tell you that even before signing up his multi-year pact with Leafs, so we know it's a multi-year deal on contract that should extend Shanahan's own current deal, Treliving reached out to Auston Matthews' camp to open the lines of communication with the franchise's biggest and brightest superstar. There you have it, right then and there. Brad Treliving knows exactly what top priority will be. His job, his number one priority this offseason will be to figure out what happens with Auston Matthews. And let's just say Brad Treliving knows a thing or two of what it means when you don't get your superstars all lined up here, right? If you're somebody who went through having to trade Matthew Tkachuk and lose Johnny Gaudreau for nothing, lessons like this are something that a lot of veterans, especially veterans who have been around as long as Brad Treliving has been around, they don't get many second, third chances at these situations. I'm sure if he had a way to deal with Johnny Gaudreau, he would have gone a different path. Matthew Tkachuk, judging by from what I've been hearing, many thought he did his best in a situation that just wasn't set up for him in the right way. Now, Brad Treliving did sign Matthew Tkachuk to a bridge deal instead of going for the long-term extension. There's always a gamble when you do that. PK Subban, if you remember when he was in Montreal, he signed that bridge deal, and then he wanted the team to really pony up on the long-term extension, and then from there, the relationship went downhill. I think what Brad Treliving obviously is seeing here, now Auston Matthews is already coming off a 5-year deal. So Treliving there's a groundwork here already being laid of a long-term commitment. And look, by all accounts, Auston Matthews is not looking to leave Toronto. And yeah, obviously he wants to strike a rich on his deal, but I think Brad Treliving will clearly understands that, for him to kind of win over those who are skeptical of his hire, getting Auston Matthews signed to a deal will quell a lot of concerns, I think. Now, that doesn't mean you have a blank check for Auston Matthews to say, here, sign. I don't know if that's what the Leafs are going to plan to do, right? At what point do you, and we talked about this on the last show, how far will the Leafs be willing to go? Like, they're not going to try to tell Auston Matthews to take a discount. I don't think so, but they're also going to be very cautious of what that next deal is going to look like for their superstar. So we'll see how this whole situation deals with. Before, we were thinking maybe not by July 1st, which is when Matthews is eligible to sign an extension. Maybe we don't get a deal done by then. Now that you have the GM in place, he's got a whole month to figure this out. I think it wouldn't surprise me if if both sides are able to come together and really lay down the groundwork for a deal. There should be no reason why this contract extension can't be done, earlier rather than later. And I think the Leafs are setting themselves up why they want to get Treliving on board right away, and maybe why they didn't cast such a wide search. Treliving must have sold them right away on what he can do, what he believes the right plan of action is with Auston Matthews. All right, let's get him on board and let's get this plan going right away. Like, you don't want to waste your time with a situation like this. So as Luke Fox said, the groundwork's already been laid, right? Brad Treliving has already kind of got he hasn't even met the media yet, and it already looks like he is trying to get Auston Matthews done. So, Leafs fans, let's see what the plan is, and I think you're should be a little happy to know that Treliving knows what the number one priority is. I mean, any GM taking this role knows who's the number one priority in Toronto. There are other priorities, though, that the Leafs do need to look at. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the things we've been hearing about Sheldon Keefe and what Brad Treliving thinks about Sheldon Keefe potentially, and what the offseason could look like if they decide not to move away from the head coach. Okay, but before we do that, I want to talk to you about today's show sponsor, and that is the FanDuel Sportsbook. It is the official sportsbook of the NBA, and you can use it during the NBA playoffs, which is now going to the NBA Finals between the Miami Heat and the Denver Nuggets. So you can go and place a wager on who you think will win that series, maybe even who you think will win the Finals MVP. I think there's someone on the Nuggets named Jokic that would be worth a vote or two. But it is also the Stanley Cup Finals between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. You can go and look and see if Florida can continue this magical run, or is it Vegas's year to finally get the Stanley Cup that they have been spending a lot of money and time trying to get. You can also look at the Conn Smythe voting. Is it Sergei Bobrovsky's to lose even if the Panthers don't win the Stanley Cup? It has happened before. So you can go and look and make that wager over at FanDuel, because new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. All right. They have great promotions every day. I'm always getting alerts from the FanDuel app about some great promotions, and especially when events are starting. It's safe, it's secure, and you get paid instantly when your bet wins. There's no place better to go and cash a bet with all the playoff action going on than America's number one sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the Locked On Network. Welcome back to the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's your team every day. I'm David Morassutti here. Mike DeStefano is not with me today. He will be back for the next episode, where we're going to have a few things to discuss, and we're going to be hearing, by the time we discuss those things, we'll already have heard from the new general manager, Brad Treliving, and I believe Brendan Shanahan. I would assume that Shanahan would be there if he's going to be unveiling a new general manager. So we'll be discussing all that is being said. And obviously some of the questions that are going to be discussed revolve around the head coach. What do the Leafs do about Sheldon Keefe? Because you can't go into this offseason without giving a firm commitment to what your coaching staff is. Now, Brad Treliving could come out and say, we're gonna take some time and figure out what we want to do. And that would be, he would be well within his right. He just got hired. To expect Brad Treliving to come out and say Sheldon Keefe is gone, that would be a little knee jerk, because you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the best chance to see kind of the lay of land of everything. How you get a sense, he's got to get a sense of what Sheldon Keefe is all about, right? He's probably seen Sheldon. I mean, his teams have gone against Sheldon Keefe's teams in the past, but I'm not sure how many conversations Brad Treliving has had with Sheldon Keefe about his vision, his plan, and all those things. So that's going to be the first thing you're going to hear. I think there's going to be some conversations had between Sheldon Keefe and Brad Treliving. And now, if you're an everydayer here at the Locked On Network, you might have already seen just kind of our thoughts on why we don't think Sheldon Keefe should return. Mainly because there are some other candidates out there that have a little more success in the playoffs, and different candidates, right? You got some different, newer voices, potentially some veterans that have been around the block a few times. We've already seen the Leafs lose an assistant coach in Spencer Carberry. So we're going to see changes to this coaching staff in the fact that they're going to have to replace Spencer Carberry. Whether there's going to be more changes to the coaching staff, that's another thing that's going to have to be discussed as well. General managers like to try to get people that they know that they or have an idea of who they want in behind the bench. So that's going to be interesting. And we've already heard kind of an inkling of why we think Sheldon Keefe is going to be back by what Sportsnet's Ellie Freeman had to say on 590. Just kind of around the time that we were hearing that Treliving was going to be, officially hired by the Leafs. And this is what Freeman had to say. From what I understand, he told them that he's more than willing to consider keeping him, and that him being Sheldon Keefe. From what I understand, Treliving is open-minded on that issue. He's prepared to meet and talk with Keefe and see if that makes sense. So I don't always I think Treliving is in a advantageous position where he gets a chance to make this coaching change now or later. Okay. If I had to put my money on Sheldon Keefe being the Leafs coach throughout this season, I don't know if I could do that. I don't know if I can put a bet down and say I feel strong enough that he's going to get the whole year. Because a couple reasons. One, this is the final year of his deal, right? I don't see how the Leafs can justify giving him a contract extension. So now we're kind of leaning towards a similar situation that Kyle Dubas found himself in, which was final year of his deal. There's some reason to think why he could get an extension, but there's also a reason why it didn't make sense to extend him. So if I'm the Leafs right now, I'm not jumping to go and extend Sheldon Keefe. At the same time, how does Sheldon Keefe feel if he's coaching without a deal going into this season? Some head coaches, that hanging over their head is a very tough situation. So I think that's why, Treliving and Keefe need to have that discussion. If we decide to keep you, are you okay coaching this year without a contract going into next season? That's a very that's an important conversation to have. Also, getting a sense from the players on this team, what they think about Sheldon Keefe, right? I'm sure a lot of them are going to say that they like Sheldon Keefe, because guess what? Sheldon Keefe has given the Leafs players a lot of reasons to like him, right? I think they also need to get a sense from the coaching staff that's already here, what they also think. It's unfortunate now. I'm going to bring up this name again with Jason Spezza. I understand that, losing him isn't the end of the world, but I think they lost such a crucial voice, because now they had someone that was in the locker room with the players and also seeing it from the outside, and not having that voice, it kind of hurts a little bit in that regard, because I thought that would have been an important thing for Treliving to be able to lean on, and it's unfortunate he doesn't get that. But this is something that Treliving is going to have to. I think this is going to be probably. Well, Auston Matthews is a priority. I think this is like 1A, 1B sort of priority, because it doesn't matter what moves Treliving could make if the coaching situation isn't sorted out in a proper way. It's gonna be almost like another wasted year. I think right now what Treliving and Shanahan need to realize is this whole idea of bringing everything back. It's not going to sell well for a lot of fans that just feel like something needs to change. Like changing out Dubas for Treliving, but then keeping everything kind of running the same doesn't really, I don't think it satisfies what I think has been an issue for this Leafs team. Is just, you got to consider. Now, I'm not saying you have to go out and make something big, but you have to consider it at least. There's got to be a desire to say, you know what, things haven't been working. Let's try to do something different. Otherwise, we're gonna get caught, with our pants down a little bit here. Other teams have been making changes. You saw what Florida. Bring up Florida. You saw what they did. Look at what Vegas, the Golden Knights, have done. How many head coaches they've been through. How many trades and deals have been made. Even players that they went and spent assets on to bring during the expansion draft or throughout the years, and then they still get shipped out. I just feel like you're seeing two different extremes here. And I really, really hope too that the reason to keep Keefe isn't that, now we got to go and pay another coach while having another coach. That should not even be an issue within MLSE. And if that is an issue, a lot of fans are not going to be too happy to hear that. So being open-minded about keeping Keefe doesn't necessarily give a proper vote of confidence. It just means, you know what? There's been a big change in the organization at general manager. If we keep Sheldon Keefe, but maybe if we give him different tools, different players, that could also be something that to consider as well. But, I just think you have to look at how the playoffs went. Look at how not just this playoffs, but the past few playoffs, and honestly look and see and say, can this coach take this team to the level of what we've seen? Just how hard it is to get to the conference finals and to the Stanley Cup final. You have to really, really think about if Keefe is that guy. So that's again, it's another difficult situation that Brad Treliving finds himself in, but he accepted the job. I think he fully understands the microscope he's going to be under. So there is going to be a microscope, and it's going to start when he does his press conference. So we're going to take one more break on the show. When we come back, we're going to talk more about just things that maybe we will expect to hear from the press conference, and maybe things that we would like to know from Treliving right off the hop. Okay, what do we want to hear from the general manager? We'll do that on the other side. I'm David Morassutti here from the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, to the Locked On Leafs podcast. It's your team every day. David Morassutti here. Mike DeStefano will be back, and we will have a lot to discuss when Mike gets back. He wanted to be here. It's a little bit, give me a little bit of a busy day in the Toronto sports landscape world. Press conferences like this, you're looking to understand and get a good jumping point. Like, this is a very important press conference for Brad Treliving, because we've seen the last two press conferences the Leafs have had, from Shanahan's and Dubas's, roller coasters. And I think, just to give I've watched my fair share of press conferences, and through a very, sports journalism scope, lens. And I'll just say this. I've also watched quite a few Brad Treliving ones when he was in Calgary. Don't expect Brad Treliving to do what Kyle Dubas did. Even Brendan Shanahan. I think he's going to be a little more reserved. Brad Treliving is a very thoughtful person. He's very well spoken. He's also, he's been on. He's not going to come out fiery. Let's say that. Don't expect a fiery one. If he has a very fiery press conference, that's gonna be my first biggest surprise, because I think Brad Treliving brings a calming factor that I think the Leafs liked when they were doing the interviews, and probably liked from Brad Treliving. And some are gonna like that, some aren't gonna like that. We may want to hear an open and honest press conference. We could get that. We might not get that. Obviously, we talked about in the last block, talking about Sheldon Keefe and the coaching. That's probably going to be the first question. If it's not the first question, it's going to be within the first 3 questions. What's going to happen with the head coach? I'd be very surprised. Be the biggest surprise if they didn't ask about the head coach. So, after talking about the head coach, what else should we expect to hear from Brad Treliving? Well, Auston Matthews. I guarantee, if I could place a bet on FanDuel, it would be they're going to ask about Auston Matthews. What's going to happen with that? But on top of that, ask about the rest of the core 4. And if I had a question at that press conference, my question would be, are you invested in keeping the core 4 together? Or is there an avenue where you feel like a deal could be made if the right one is out there? Are you willing to make a drastic move to help this team be a contender? And actually, if you want to ask that question in a different way, you could say, as this roster is currently constructed with the core in place, is this core good enough to be a contender? Do you feel like this core just needs movement around to be a contender? That's a very pointed question. Basically, should be almost like a yes or no question, but to kind of explain too, why do you think this core is good enough as well? I would ask as a follow-up. Why do you feel like, given everything that's happened in the last few years, running it back again makes the most sense? I think this has to be a time where you have to really push. And if Brendan Shanahan's there, even ask him, do you feel like this core is good enough? Why do you think this core is good enough? Why is there no desire to make changes after everything that's happened over the last 7 or so years? Right? It's not enough to say that progress was made after winning a playoff round and things were, there was a close battle against Florida, even though you got bowed out in 5 games. At some point, there has to be the honest discussion about why there's no desire to make that change that other teams seem to be willing to make if they want to take that next step. You have the best example within your own organization. I understand it's a different sport, but the Toronto Raptors, after how many years of failing to get as far as they believe they could get, they decide, you know what? We're not only going to fire the head coach of the year, literally head coach of the year, we're also going to trade a franchise player, a beloved player in DeMar DeRozan, and go and get Kawhi Leonard. Now, I understand that Kawhi Leonard doesn't always come about available in a trade. It's really the only way the Raptors were going to get Kawhi Leonard, in my opinion, too. But it just shows that, you know what? This team isn't good enough. We have to make maybe the unpopular move, but the right move, because I hate to say this, but what's the priority? Is the priority to win, or is the priority to make the fans happy in a way about keeping certain players around? I hate to tell you this. I'm sure a lot of fans would rather see this team win. Right? It's been too damn long with the same old story. And I think at some point, yes, you would love to have everyone stick around. But at the end of the day, it means nothing if you have that empty disappointing, frustrating feeling of another season almost going to waste after losing in the playoffs. And that's where I feel like some of that needs to be projected out, because I don't know how the front office doesn't say to themselves, like, it hasn't been good enough. And at what point do they say a formula needs to change a little bit? Now, you don't have to scrap the formula. I'm not saying trade Auston Matthews, trade everybody away, but you have to tinker with the formula. You have to find out what's working and not working, because you can't just magically hope it's going to change, because it hasn't changed. This team has had the same old story come about year after year after year. And it gets to the point where you have to feel like something has to change. So that's going to be something to watch in this press conference, because we remember Kyle Dubas said everything was on. If he was coming back, everything was on the table. Now, whether that was true or not, whether he had the ability to say that, we don't know. But I'm going to be very interested in seeing what Brad Treliving has to say about that similar situation. And we'll be keeping a close eye on that when Treliving talks to the media. So that will do it for us here on the podcast. We're going to keep it short today because there's going to be so much more to talk about on the next show. If you're in every day, we'll be glad to have you back on the next show. If you're not, well, what are you doing? Subscribe to Locked On Leafs podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from, audio form on, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. Go and subscribe. Give us a like. Give us a 5-star review. Go and follow us on YouTube as well. Subscribe there. You get the latest episodes. You can get notified as soon as we publish. And you can follow myself at @_Morassutti and follow Mike at Mickey_Canuck and follow the show at Locked On Leafs. Until then, we'll talk to you on the next episode. We'll go through the Brad Treliving press conference. Until then, keep locked right here on Locked On Leafs.